Hi people, it's Sarkavist here, and after 2 months I want to give my impressions on the Nintendo Switch OLED. A product that I got somewhat as a result of oversight. When the Switch OLED was announced, I wasn't massively blown away because there weren't any internal hardware changes to make it more powerful, more capable of playing those more demanding third-party titles. It was mostly about that OLED screen, hence the name. But we have got a bit of a scalper situation going on at the moment, and my logic was, well, if I don't pre-order it immediately and I hesitate even a few days, they might have already all been bought up. So I thought, okay, I'll pre-order it, and if I change my mind, I've got plenty of time to cancel it. So I did that, pre-ordered it, and then I forgot for a couple of months. Then, to my surprise, my phone dings, I check my text, and Argos, the retailer that I pre-ordered it from, says, "You have a package arriving later today." And I remember, oh yeah, I pre-ordered a Switch, didn't I? An OLED Switch. So that reminded me I got it, and I thought, okay, well, I didn't really consider cancelling it. It didn't come into my mind, so fine, let's go with this new OLED Switch. So it arrived, and I immediately went through the transfer process from the launch day Switch that I previously owned onto the OLED Switch, and it was actually pretty easy. I've heard some people say it was a bit awkward, but in my experience it was pretty frictionless. You just brought the devices together, there was a little bit of a period of transfer, and I think that the longest part was re-downloading my games, but it was just a day of not using the Switch and leaving it to its own devices while it downloaded. Not the end of the world, and it hasn't been a trouble since. And I initially started playing games in docked mode. Yeah, I know that was a bit strange, but I really felt a desire to play Metroid Dread on my actual TV OLED. And without question, the OLED Switch in docked mode is essentially like using a launch day Switch in docked mode. It's pretty much the same experience, especially as I'm using a Pro controller, so I was even using the same device. So it basically felt the same, it looked the same. The only difference was that when I glanced at my TV and looked at my dock, I saw a white dock rather than my old black one. And it is a nice looking dock. It not only is the colour changing things up a bit, but I do like the curved edges on it, which is quite nice. But when I took the Switch out of the dock and just thought, okay, let's see what this OLED screen's about, I might as well do it. I have bought an OLED Switch. The difference was massive. It's a really, really nice looking OLED screen. And I compared just sort of like the UI on my old Switch against it, and I thought, wow, this is a huge jump. The OLED screen brings, I think, 3 major advantages. Number one, and most prominently, colours are a lot more vibrant. If you're looking at like a Nintendo game that has a lot of primary colours, for example, a Mario game like Mario's Hat, and you compare the reds, you'll see that the red on Mario's Hat is so much redder, so much more vibrant in your face than it is on the original. And there's even an OS level setting where you can choose between vivid and I think just standard or realistic. And by default, it's on the vivid option, and that does actually, I think, complement a lot of Nintendo games where you don't need them to look super realistic. You want them to have bold and bright colours because that fits what they're going for. So that's the first thing. There's also the fact that the screen is, of course, a bit bigger now. Not much to say about this other than the fact that it visually made more of a difference to me than I thought it would when I saw images of the Switch OLED and saw how much bigger it actually was. And then also there's the fact that if you want to represent black on an OLED screen, each pixel can be individually turned off so that you can make blacks look as pure as if you actually had the screen turned off, which can make a difference in some games like Metroid Dread. There's a lot of pure black areas around the map, but other Nintendo games can be quite vibrant, as I talked about, which means there aren't as many black areas, so it becomes less of an advantage. So that's why it's not my biggest reason for wanting to recommend it, because it's context sensitive. It depends on the kind of games you actually play. There is a little bit of a disadvantage to the screen though. It's quite minor, but because the resolution is still 720p, but the screen size has increased, it means that the pixel density is actually less than the default Switch and a lot less than the Switch Lite. But at the same time, if you actually compare the two, it's not much of a difference. I would say it's most glaringly obvious if you compare it to really any modern day smartphone. Even cheap smartphones these days have resolutions on their screens that are so high you really can't see any pixels, even if you put your eye right up to the display, it seems now. But this, if you're playing a game that has a lot of text in it, it definitely can show the weakness of the screen, where that lower resolution is unfortunately all too easy to see. If you're playing a game with a lot of big, bold shapes and not a lot of complex detail, however, that becomes a lot less of an issue. So something like maybe Mario Kart, really any Mario game tends to have not a ton of text, and even when it does have text, it will be quite big text. So it's not so much of a disadvantage there. But if I'm playing something like Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, there's loads of fine text there, and then it starts to get quite messy. So that is a disadvantage to be aware of, but it is absolutely dwarfed and made basically a non-issue against the improvements that the OLED screen makes. So I'm mentioning it because I feel like I should say the one negative there, but overall, it is a much, much better screen than the original. There are also some other improvements. The kickstand is a lot better, mostly in the fact that it doesn't just snap off now. I didn't really use the old stand that much because it felt so flimsy, but this one is a massive jump. The only thing to say there is you have to ask yourself, how much do you really use the stand? I mean, I kind of realised that when I set the Switch up for this video, this is probably one of the few times I'm actually going to use it, because I'm often either holding the Switch in my hand just as a handheld, or it's in the dock. The tabletop mode, I guess it's called, is probably the least usage I do for the Switch. I think if the Switch had a better screen and better speakers, I would be more inclined to use it as like a tablet, maybe watch videos in bed or something like that. But because of those disadvantages, I'll always choose, like a tablet or something else. Speaking of the speakers, allegedly they've improved. I didn't notice it. Maybe they have, but I don't think it's to a meaningful degree. I think it's definitely the right choice to use headphones if you can for mobile gaming, because the ones on it, they'll do, but they're not great. They're never going to impress you, really. And for atmospheric games, they're not going to really bring you into experience in the same way a good pair of headphones would, or if you're in docked mode, your TV and your surround sound might. There is technically a docked advantage. It's very minor, but the storage, the internal storage that comes with the device has doubled from 32 to 64. The only reason that isn't that big of an advantage is because I think anyone who really needs more storage on the Switch, which I'd say is probably most people because it's got so little storage by default, have got an SD card. So it's going to give you a minor advantage. I guess the smaller your SD card is, the more you will appreciate this upgrade. That's probably the way to say it. I do like the fact it's there. It kind of justifies it a little bit to me when I've got it in docked mode. But yeah, it's not a reason to buy it. Just get a bigger SD card. It's the obvious thing to do there. Aesthetically, I think it's a nice looking device as well. It's got a great color scheme, I think, with those new white Joy-Cons. It's giving it that almost PS5 look, the black and white. I'm a big fan of that. Obviously, you can mix and match Joy-Cons to your heart's content though, so if the colour scheme of this one isn't to your liking, there's so many more combinations you can make. Yeah, it's pretty good. So those are my thoughts on the OLED Switch specifically, but I did also want to just talk about how I feel like the Switch is doing as a platform overall, just because I don't really talk about that too much. So I think for the Switch, like if I go back to 2017, I was immediately blown away by the software on this device. It brought me back from a long break from Nintendo, the Switch did. We had Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, all in the same year. So many great games in such a short space of time, and it made such a great impression. And we have continued to get great games like Smash Bros. Ultimate, Metroid Dread, some really great Wii U ports which have some additional enhancements like Bowser's Fury, but they are releasing much further apart now. And I have to say, it feels like some years we've had, there hasn't been a lot of great stuff on the Switch. So I don't know, maybe it's partially because they really front-loaded a lot of their good software, but it definitely feels like the momentum has started to reduce on the Switch. But you could say it's better to have it at the start than the end, because at least we do have all of this great software to play. And I think because of the timeless way in which Nintendo design their games, I'm more than happy to go back to games like Mario Odyssey and replay them every now and then. They're short, they're fun, they're just good old experiences. There is, of course, a big disadvantage with the Switch. It was a disadvantage at the beginning, but now it's even more so a disadvantage, are the visuals. Not every game is necessarily impacted that badly. Smash Brothers, for example, looks as good as I want it to. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe still looks phenomenal, and that was originally a Wii U game. So any game that's going for a sort of simplistic, cartoony visual, I think is fine on the Switch. But the moment you try and take something that's being released on, say, the Xbox Series X or the PS5 and bring it back to the Switch, you have to make such heavy compromises that unless you really want the mobile element of the game, it's just never going to hold up. So it's a big disadvantage of the Switch, and I really do hope, even though I've recently acquired this one, the faster Nintendo can get us a true upgrade to the Switch, be it a Switch Pro or the Switch 2, whatever we're talking about, whatever gets us that better hardware, I'm still going to be very happy to get it. So the Switch is, as many Nintendo consoles have been like for a long time now, a really great console for its own first parties, but not so great when it comes to third party titles, which makes it a really good companion device alongside a gaming PC or a PS5 or a Series X, but it would be, I think, a little bit limiting if it was your only console. I think it's something that's great to have alongside something else, is what I would say there. So if you're wondering, should I get a Nintendo Switch? I think the Switch Lite is actually quite a good option if you're a little bit unsure. It's very affordable. It can play most games that you can play on the regular Switch. There are some limitations just because it can't have the Joy-Cons taken off, and some games do demand that. So if you're considering getting a particular game, do definitely check online to see if you can play that particular game on the Switch Lite. But for most people, it's a very safe option, and in terms of mobility, a very versatile option. But if you do want that hybrid experience, I think the Switch OLED is the obvious choice. I see no real reason, unless you can find it for an absolute steal, to get the default Switch, be it the launch day Switch or the revised Switch. This OLED Switch does seem to be the way to go. But do be aware that disadvantage of graphics is a genuine issue with this console at the moment, when it comes to third-party titles at least. So the very safe option, I think, is to maybe wait a little bit until we see a true hardware upgrade. I have no idea when that will be. You know, the Switch Pro was rumoured for so long and never came out, so I don't want to speculate at all as to when that will be, but it might be worth considering waiting for that true hardware revision, because we are many years now into the overall Switch's life cycle, so we can't be that far off. And I think if we want to see, you know, these games that are coming out on next gen have any chance of being ported to the Switch in anything but an ultra broken form, we do need a more powerful version of this device. But again, you know, I suppose if money's no object, if you don't mind going for it, the Switch OLED is a lot of fun. I love mine. It's great device, but it does have a few weaknesses, as I've mentioned in the video. So as always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.